you post the Jabber link in the WebEx chat?
Hey, Glenn, say something. Your video is fine. That'll do. Hey, Glenn.
Good morning.
Okay. Yeah, I'll post the Jabber link.
Let me just pull up the agenda for today. Hopefully, it should be pretty simple since we don't have a lot of presentations. In fact, we have 0.
Yep. I've got to get the Cody.
So we will need note takers and Jabberscribe.
Yeah. I don't know if Ben's willing to do it again, but boy, was that handy.
Boy, was he good at it too. I mean,
Yeah.
really, really well done notes.
Yeah.
All right, how does that look?
Viewable.
Awesome.
Okay, and then that's currents.
Your audio is a little bit choppy there, sir, or muddled.
Oh, sorry, maybe because I was actually kind of mumbling. So is that clearer?
That is clearer.
Okay, good. I was turning to the side and mumbling, so those two things are not very good.
See, my excuse is that's just how I talk.
It's not radio decorum.
Okay, I see people are slowly trickling in. Hey, WebEx, if you're listening, it'd be really nice if in the breakout Zoom or the breakout participants window, you can make it bigger instead of just showing 4 people at a time.
I wish I had an option for side-by-side participant list and chat list.
There is a crazy idea.
We've already covered time zones significantly across the world. Good evening, Mark Andrews. Good morning, Glenn Dean.
Good morning.
Buddy.
Well, I suspect that while this particular session is time zone friendly for the UK and Eastern US, I think that the future time zones, especially the Bangkok one, will be much more friendly towards Asia Pacific.
I am already planning on sleeping in my office all week of IETF. Because in part, I'm likely to get more sleep in my office than I would if I were at home trying to sleep during the day with 7-year-old twins there.
Yeah, that's the hardest. That's what I found to be really hard with the last IETF. Was I was doing, the IETF sessions during IETF time zone, but then the rest of my life was still on California time, and so I was still.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but Paul just indicated in the hang on, we have to rip off a message to the mailing list. The WebEx link didn't go to the mailing list. You want to take care of that, or?
Yeah, that's odd.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but since this is kind of vital for people that are now looking for how to join.
Well, let me send the link directly just to the meetings.
Well, I subscribe to the IETF calendar, so
Yeah, I think
it's just there.
There was a glitch this morning with the IETF calendar and time zone entries for this particular ICS. Somebody raised it like about an hour ago. So and Henrik has already fixed it apparently. So
The last one was at somebody had forgot to set the time zone for something at some point.
Yeah, Lars mentioned that there was no time zone, and so it looked like it was 1 p.m. no matter where you were.
Which doesn't work well. Bangkok starting the day at midday though doesn't really help me all that much. Moves everything into my evening because it's already 3 hours, and then there's another 3 hours. It puts it 6 hours back in the day for me.
So do we just need to establish the official IETF time zone where it's IETF time and we just live on it? Okay, so I just dropped to the mailing list the reference to the meetings page. And we're at the very top since we're on today.
Isn't the official IETF time zone GMT, surely, Glenn?
That's a very UK-centric historical view of the time zones.
It's UTC.
Now, I think you find it was originally a GMT, and most of the world is still coloured pink on the maps, I think. Even in the colonies, Glenn.
Okay. Well, my computer's just informed me at 6 o'clock. So how are we doing for participants?
I think we barely have any because you didn't send out the URL in the meeting notice. I'm seeing very few people in Jabber.
Yeah, we definitely, because of this cock-up, Glenn, I think we have to give it a few more minutes.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the attendees list. Looks like we have 28 so far. Okay, and I just got a copy of the email I sent, so it did hit the list.
Church Tower is now telling me that it's the top of the hour.
While we are waiting, does anybody who has made it so far want to volunteer to help us out and either be a note taker? You can have more than one. More than one is always welcome. Or a Jabber scribe.
I
A little bit. I'm going to end up falling asleep during this.
Yeah.
Last meeting, I back also. I just like it.
It was that exciting. No.
Exciting.
Today we're going to talk
Andrew,
about authentication.
so Andrew is going to do Jabber for us again, and I actually had dropped a private message over to Ben, who maybe he's not seen it yet, and I don't know if he's in the WebEx yet.
Let's see. Ben is not on the WebEx.
Oh, he is in Jabber.
Yes, I am.
Oh, great. And so have you considered my offer of uncompensated accolades for, again, not to put you
During
too
your
much,
offer.
but they were excellent notes, so.
Yeah. Yeah, the last meeting looked to be very good as much as I saw of them.
They were really well done. Ben set a new standard for note taking, I think, for ADD.
Yep, best notes we've ever seen anywhere ever. Flattery, what I think will get us everywhere for this.
It's almost like we were there.
Well, I can help with notes, but I don't think I can do it alone.
Yes.
Can we have a second helper to jump in and help Ben, please? Remember, this is your chance to choose the correct use of your and keep the people really passionately feel strongly about the correct use of or and its. This is your chance to show your skills. Impress
I'll help out with the minutes.
Okay.
It's Chris Box.
Thank you, Chris. So this is a chance to show what your third grade teacher taught you. So and show it well. So do not get the apostrophe in the wrong place. Okay, so we have two notes takers, Ben Schwartz with assistance of Chris Box. We have a Jabber scribe through Andrew Tamplin. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ben. We have 39 participants, and I think more will trickle in. So I suggest we get started with the high level stuff, especially so that people in time zones where their body's saying it's time to go to bed, we maybe get through this a little bit early and let them go to bed a little bit earlier than they expected. So hi, I'm Glenn Dean. I am one of your co-chairs along with David Lawrence of the ADD working group. The area director is Barry Leva, and well, you know the rest. Let me get focused here. Please be aware that this meeting is an IETF official meeting and it is subject to note well. Any submissions here fall under the note well terms. We are using WebEx for this session. So like the previous sessions, using WebEx, we're going to use the format of doing +Q and -Q in the WebEx chat to get yourself added to the discussion. Please use the Jabber room for other discussions and keep the WebEx session chat free just for the queuing, please. Also, we have notes being taken over there on Etherpad or intended by COMID. So this is the agenda for today. It's very high level, and I'll show you the authentication topics a page in a second so we can bash those. But we coming out of the session number 1 last week, authentication based upon conversations on lists, contributions in various documents, and contributions in the Jabber chat really showed that authentication and the bigger topic of authentication, a lot of different places, was something that was of concern to people and would like some more clarification. And so we've essentially dedicated this session to just talking about authentication subtopics. And there's the chairs, there's the things. So based upon the mailing list and based upon the query I put out on Friday for input on suggestions and some other things, I pulled together the following 8 subtopics for discussion on authentication. Technically, there's 7, and at the very end, there's the number 8, which says, are there any other topics that need to be considered? And so hopefully that will allow us to have enough freedom, but any major topic around authentication that people think that we need to talk about today does get covered. And that is the agenda for today, these 8 lines. Is there anything people would like to request to remove or to add to this list?
Can I suggest that people might want to mute if they're not talking? There's quite a lot of background noise.
Oh, that's much better. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Okay,
so I had a
suggestions?
question,
Oh,
Glenn.
yes.
When we're talking about authentication here, are we considering the reduced scope of the single use case, or are we considering beyond that?
Okay,
I would
before
say-
we answer that question, I want to point out 2 things. Appreciate the question, Chris. But one of the slides that Glenn just blew right past was we are going to again be doing queue management through the WebEx chat, to which Tommy Polly has added himself to the queue. Chris, I mean, we'll handle your question first, but let's be doing this plus Q minus Q if you want mic time, please. Thank you. So Chris or Glenn, finish up your answer for Chris's question, and then we'll move on to Tom.
To answer your question, Chris, I think this is still looking at the full scope. The single use case proposal that's being discussed on the list, I don't think it's come to closure yet. And so we're still looking at the big picture.
Great, thank you. Tommy, please.
Yeah, could we go back to the list of questions? Yeah, so I think it's fine to go with this list. My one suggestion would be that as far as the order, it may be useful to talk about the attacker model number 5 prior to getting into should DHCP play a role, because that is really dependent on the answer to number 5.
That seems reasonable. Anybody want to jump in the queue and argue with that?
Yeah, Ecker, please.
Yeah, I don't think I want to. I think if we're gonna, the DHCP question is contingent not just on the authentication model, but also on the deployment model. And so I guess I don't know how people want to manage that, because as I point out on the list, it's pretty common to have user-provided customer premise equipment between you and the carrier-provided customer premise equipment, and there's no particular reason to think it's going to pass unknown DHCP options. So, I don't understand how to answer the DHCP question unless we have established what the deployment model is. With respect to the question of the use model, whether it's the single use cases Martin pointed out or others, as Chris suggested. As far as I can tell, the authentication situation for the use cases that are not the local deployment use cases, like most of the ones in the sort of ones that were unique to the app, the DNS, is actually relatively straightforward. And so I think it would be probably more useful to talk about the local authentication cases, even if you think that the other cases should be in scope for our work.
So, Ecker, if I can tease out of that, you're agreeing with moving number 5 up to the first thing we discuss?
Sure, if you want to reduce 5 points to 1.
Sorry, there was a lot to decompress right there, to unpack. So to be clear, move number 5 up, and then what else would you like to?
So I don't think we can address the DHCP issue unless we previously discuss what deployment model we intend to deploy in, because that tells you whether it's even technically feasible regardless of authentication. And second, I think while I don't think we have to decide the question of which use cases we're interested in, I think for the purpose of this discussion, it is most useful to focus on the local use cases, because the other use cases actually have much more straightforward authentication stories.
Okay. All right then. Let's take the rest of the agenda batch queue here. Dave, you want to manage this?
Michael Richardson, please.
Hi. Does it work? No.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You're a little quiet though.
I wasn't sure if the press space bar actually worked now. So I think I'm agreeing with Eckert, but I'm not sure. I guess I would ask the question about number 2 is, does the client know how to authenticate the network a priori? And I think that it's a similar statement, but I don't know if it's the same question.
Okay.
You want to address that, Glenn, or?
Well, that I think it's something the group needs to discuss, because it comes back to Ecker's point of what deployment environments are you working in, right?
Right. That might actually be substantiative discussion on the item itself. So.
Right.
Okay. Paul Hoffman, please.
So just to bring up one thing that's related to 5 and others that people seem to think was an okay thought last week is what are we assuming for trust anchors? We either have a trust anchor that the user is already holding, or a trust anchor that they got through some unauthenticated mechanism. And those certainly relate to DHCP and such, but I'm not saying that that should be a separate item, but I think that that has to be part of certainly 5, because, we don't know how the attacker is, like if the attacker can do something that can push a trust anchor to you, that's completely different. So let's put, just, again, not as a separate item, but please put that into the considerations.
Okay, Glenn, that was the current queue.
Okay, and then Paul Wouters, I see, made a comment. Paul, do you want to jump in and make the comments so everybody can, because I don't know if people are following in the chat.
Sorry, okay. I just wanted to make a note that in response to Michael's question, like no, you cannot really, like, any network name has a name and it's public knowledge, because otherwise you can't see or join it. And so anyone can take that name, and usually you only have a name as an identifier to the network you're joining if you're on Wi-Fi. So names are just not enough. So you can never know what network you're joining, if it's rogue or not.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, so what I'm teasing out of that is we really should start with number 5. There's a number of sub-elements that number 5 drives us to consider, and I think Ecker listed them out. So if people want to have a record of that they can refer to, go look at the notes in the Etherpad, because they captured the list that Ecker said. And so let's juggle the discussion order and start with number 5. So this is meant to be a discussion, not a chairs-led thing. So let us open up the floor to discussion about this particular topic space. And we'll capture your comments, and then when the conversation seems to sort of reach a natural, either we're starting to repeat ourselves or straying off things, we'll pull it back in and refocus it on the next question. The one thing I will suggest is, this conversation, especially in the local discovery, can possibly start straying us into some other aspects about network bootstrapping models that are sort of like, well, wouldn't it be nice if? And that would be sort of out of scope for the ADD group, and probably a much bigger rat's hole for us to try to actually do productive work into. So let's stick to stuff that we can actually do today, or that is near term that we can do. My suggestion. And with that, I'll stop talking.
Andrew Camplin, please.
All right, just to say on the mic what I've said on Jabber, just picking up on Ecker's point about the sort of local network environment, which is obviously linked to this. Certainly in the UK, I think many other European markets, the ISP provides a sort of a router or router, even for those of you in the US, with sort of Wi-Fi capability, etc. So I think it would be reasonable to say that the majority of consumer users, and probably SME users, are likely to be using IFP provided kit, albeit they're perfectly at liberty to either unplug the ISP kit completely if they wish, or indeed to connect their own kit to augment its capabilities. But the default is they'd be using the ISP provided kit. They don't need, in most cases, to provide anything else. So I just wanted to add that to the sort of thought process around, if you like, the environment in which the local discovery needs to happen.
Thank you, Andrew. Ben Schwartz, please.
Hi, Ben Schwartz. On this topic, I think rather than trying to decide which capabilities an attacker could have or could not have, I think that we are going to have to address a pretty wide variety of potential attacker models and provide things that, some solutions will work in some models and some will not be secure in some of those models. So rather than trying to reach consensus on which attacks are in scope or out of scope, that what would be most helpful for me is to have a taxonomy of the attacks so that when we are developing solutions, we can have a shared understanding of which attacks are prevented or not prevented by each proposed solution.
Great, thank you. Ecker?
Yeah, I think 3 points. One, to follow up on what Andrew said, it's reasonably common in the United States as well for ISPs to provide Wi-Fi capable access points, or CPE. But on the other hand, it's also quite common for customers to plug in their own CPE to that CPE, especially if they want to have, for instance, a Wi-Fi mesh system or something like that. So I think perhaps the question that is supplementary here is what level of success is one interested in. So for instance, if enters the majority, so 30% of people provide their own CPE and it doesn't work on those people, is 70% success a good success rate or a bad success rate? So I think that's probably one thing we should understand. I just made those numbers up, obviously. Second, I think with respect to Ben's suggestion, certainly I think that there's certainly going to be a variety of situations, but if we have 25 different threat models and also 25 different protocols to meet the threat models, then we're going to be here a really, really, really long time. So my put would be, if there's not at least one threat model which occupies a fairly large fraction of the people and which has a solution which does something useful in that situation, then probably we should be taking a step back and thinking about it. And what I really don't want to see is a situation in which we have a pilot, which have a set of solutions which each of which is bad in some threat model, and none of which occupies a big enough threat model space to be useful.
Thank you, Ecker. Thierry, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, so Thiru from McAfee. So I just wanted to add to what Edgar was saying, that nowadays we see many of the security vendors are offering network security services on home routers. It could be an off-the-shelf home router, or it could be co-located with the ISP provided CPE. In both the cases, if you see, it's not just from McAfee. We offer Secure Home platform, which offers network security services, DNS filtering, device isolation, various other security features to protect the home network. These routers are quite advanced that we see that it's quite easy for us to upgrade the firmware or configuration on these routers. And whatever mechanism the working group decides, either DHCP or a new resource record type or a especially as a domain name, it would be quite easy for us to update the configuration of firmware to support that and help the client discover the network provider to resolve within the spaces. So what we have seen in deployments is we have seen models where we have seen legacy routers which are quite unupgradable, and they have to rely on the ISP's resolver for, let's say, for entire home provide malware filtering, and they cannot rely anything on the home networks to offer any security services. And we also see home routers having these capabilities so that they can get protection at the first of it.
Thank you very much, Tiru. The one thing I was aware of as I was also watching the notes, and this is meant in a very friendly way to everybody. Please remember that our note taker is heroic, but it does help to kind of pace your speaking a little so they can keep up. So with that, Paul Hoffman again, please.
So I will disagree with Ben Schwartz strongly on the way forward. Lots of people have proposed things, including me, that did not have clearly stated use cases. And then, I'm sorry, lots of people have proposed solutions without clearly stated use cases. And I put myself in that category. The result of that so far, because look, we've been doing this for like a year now, is that people attack it because, you know, the solution, because it doesn't meet their use case, or they support it because if you stretch it a little bit in this direction, it does meet their use case. And so far, this has led to no progress at all. I strongly believe we should do it based on use cases and attack scenarios. And I think those two here are quite related. The use case is, I want to get X in this environment. The statement of this environment, even if you don't remember all the attackers in the environment, certainly other people on the list will throw some at you, leads to either, will definitely lead to two things. One, it will lead to this proposal meets the use case, and two, this proposal meets the use case except for these kind of people. And we've been talking about these kind of people who put in their own Wi-Fi, people who are using the company Wi-Fi, which might stomp on things, stuff like that. So preference towards use case and environment first, and then proposal.
Thank you, Paul. Jim Reed, please.
Thanks, guys. I'll try to speak slowly, and I apologise for the accent for the note taker.
Thank you,
I
Jim.
kind of agree with what Ben and Ecker have said, and to a large extent with what Paul has done too. I would suggest the way forward here is that we should try to gather as many of the use cases as possible. Let's set a deadline for that. Let's say, for example, towards the end of the year, maybe say at the next IETF meeting would be a suitable point. So it should be incumbent on the people in the working group to come up with a use case and just a couple of sentences about the threat model or the potential problems that this use case might throw up. And then once we've got all that information together, we can then take a look at this in the labs and say, well, that particular solution is out of scope for us, or it's going to take too long, or it's too complicated, we don't understand it, and then make engineering decisions about which ones are the ones we can work on and achieve solutions in a reasonable amount of time. I think at the moment we're going round in circles quite a lot, and I think it would help greatly if we have some deadlines and some focus by saying, let's get all the use case together by a specific date and with some outlines of the threats that these pose, then have a discussion about those kind of issues and then figure out how we work from there on forward. Because I think at the moment we're just going round and round and we're not really making a lot of progress.
Right. Thank you very much, Jim. And just for people that are unaware of our relationship, since a comment came up in chat, we're everybody's accent is just fine. We're just a little friendly Scots humor there. Paul Routers, please.
Sorry, I want to make two comments. One is that it seems people are thinking a lot about the ISP scenario, where the ISP gives some equipment or not, and you connect to it. But that leaves out a lot of all the mobile devices that have 5G or 4G connections straight up, where the control is a lot different, the security is a lot different. And I just want to make sure that people are thinking about that too. Another comment was to say my own CPE equipment that I happen to have changed last month came with a password of admin that I could change everything with except the DNS settings. For the DNS settings, I then had to type in the serial number of the device to make changes to it. So people are definitely trying to make things more secure, but on the other hand, I think like it's also clear that most networks people connect to are untrusted, and so it always comes down to just give the information and let the connecting entity make their own security decisions based on it. And if you look at like what Mozilla is doing, I think it's already moving in that direction, not even for the entire device, but for applications on the device. So I would like the discovery model to more focus on getting the information to the user and letting the user make those decisions. And whether or not you can secure this later on, that would be great if we can do that, but it should not prevent the publication of this information so that the user can make a decision if they want.
Thank you very much, Paul. Kiru again, please.
Hello. I'll try to be slow this time. So I see two different types of networks that I think we've been discussing. One is home networks or free Wi-Fi networks where the users log into a network ID that is well known to everybody, and users typically use a common password. And that seems to be a problem that the user may not even know whether the user is indeed connecting to the home network or it could be an evil twin. But in case of enterprise networks, it would be typically that the user would get unique credentials, would end up using a.2.nx and any of the EAP methods, and it could be an unique username password, or it could be a unique certificate that you could get. And in that case, the endpoint does know that it is actually connecting to the intended organization's network and not to an evil thing. So I think in those two cases, the attack vectors are quite different. So I think that would help probably to understand each of these use cases, like someone has mentioned previously, to explain the threat models that would be applicable to, for example, a free Wi-Fi network or a home network or an enterprise network, to understand if you can have a discovery mechanism that would work in one or more of these use cases. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kiru. Tommy Pauly, please. Unless one quick question. Glenn, do you want to take a priority chair leap? Okay, Tommy Pauly, please.
Yeah, thanks. So we were talking about the deployment model a lot. The question here that Eckert raised was around kind of what's the attacker models. I'd like to discuss a bit about that. So I'd send a mail in response on the list. So I guess I like to throw out as a straw man, kind of like an attacker model we can talk about. So it seems to me that it's useful to talk about an attacker that can inject and observe your DNS packets. So that can be someone on your local network or otherwise who's trying to get you to look at their encrypted DNS server, but they aren't a full man in the middle for DHCP. Because I think there are cases in which if you're providing all of the DHCP and RAs, you're essentially a router in an untrusted network. That's not going to help us at all. And then there are models on the other end in which I have a VPN and I'm trusting my provisioning entirely. That's also pretty simple. So it seems like if we're going to do anything that is not just based in the provisioning mechanism that has some kind of new requirements on authenticity, it would be around validating that this new DOE or encrypted resolver I have is related to the thing I got over DHCP, assuming that I want to use that resolver. But I guess I'd like to hear if people have disagreements with that attacker. Well,
okay, thank you, Tommy. Wes Hardiker, please.
Yeah, the one I think thing that I keep thinking about as I'm listening to this discussion is that we are in the camp of, we're letting perfect be the enemy of the good to a large extent. It takes a long time to be perfect, and even things like DHCP can be useful across boundaries given equipment rollover times, which are getting faster and faster. You just have to take that into consideration when you're building a longer term plan. So the result is, you have to build a timeline with respect to a rollout, and there seem to be sort of two solution timelines that keep getting talked about. One is, what can we accomplish now, right? That the IETF is always trying to come up with protocols that work within the current environment. And sometimes that means, what can we do within a browser update, which is a really convenient, short, often 3-month kind of timeline. But there's also the vision of what can you do with a longer term. And I think you've got to consider even the possibility that there are multiple approaches with a fallback mechanism for, well, DHCP isn't passing anything, therefore I have to go back to another one. And I hate to say that within the IETF, because we generally only like to do one solution for, protocol kind of concerns. But there are times when you can't, and there are times where, you either can't wait for something to come out, or you have to wait until something comes out. And I think we might be in the camp where we may need to do both.
Great, thank you, Wes. And I believe that is exactly what Glenn wants to speak to now, as speaking from the chair, trying to direct conversation.
Exactly. So from what I've heard from the conversation, which has been pretty good, and what I'm also trying to follow the Jabber chat, we seem to be settling around, my observation is that we seem to be settling around a couple of core use cases. The in-home use case seems to be one that a lot of people are talking about and are comfortable with some sort of sub cases around it, where you may have various attackers. I've seen some proposals here in the Jabber chat about people, doing hinky things such as impersonating your home network. But I think that that's actually a pretty rare occurrence in the wild. But also we have more complex environments, such as the mobile space, and when you are visiting cafes and stuff like that. So I'll throw it to the group as we shape the discussion here. Maybe when you are raising an issue, tell us which of these environments you're actually directly addressing in your comments. And maybe as well, give an indication of, do you think that the priority, and not the exclusive thing, but the priority should be one or the other, and such as the comments by Wes, for instance, just to sort of help us shape and direct the conversation. I'll turn my mic back off.
Thank you, Glenn. Ecker, please.
Yeah. So I guess, unfortunately, I don't think the division Glenn proposed works. There's no meaningful way to differentiate between your home network and the Wi-Fi network that you just joined if they both have passwords. So they're the same thing. So I don't understand how that works. I'm sort of frankly not very enthusiastic with the point Wes just made. But I guess once again, I'll just go back to the question I think I raised on the phone, which is earlier, which is what would you consider success in terms of in terms of success right now? If that number is 50%, that's one thing, and if the number 95%, that's quite another. And so I think we really understand, I guess, that question, regardless of what we think the environment is. Third, this question of what Tommy was saying. I guess I don't really understand what capabilities would lead, what physical capabilities would lead me to not be able to spoof DHCP messages, but would lead me to spoof DNS messages. They're both just raw UDP. So Tommy, I guess maybe you can explain to me how that situation would come to pass.
Okay, thank you, Ecker. Ralph Weber, please.
Ralph Weber, I also can maybe answer that. I mean, a lot of the enterprise environment and
Ralph, you're a little muted. Can you get closer to the mic or speak up? Or...
Trying. Is it better now?
Slightly.
Okay. So the reason why you can maybe handle DHCP differently is then in a lot of enterprise environments, switches have guards against from which port you actually can send the DHCP answers. And this might be also in some hardware, I don't know. So this is why this is different. But then the question I have, which is, I mean, why didn't we just do DCP last year? Because I think there was a draft for that. And I would be, especially for the home case, be okay to do that because it's probably the quickest win for anything. That's it.
I was sitting here with my mic muted, talking about other people's muted mics. So I'm very sorry about that all. I'm like, why isn't Eric responding? Because I derped. I'm sorry. Eric Nygren, please. You're up.
Thanks. Eric Nygren, Akamai. I think that while some of these problems there's certainly no way to deal with now, and while the scope of solving some of them now is certainly not something we want to have as part of the scope of ADD, it would be nice to think about ways that didn't necessarily preclude some better solutions down the line. So, for example, when Paul was listing the categories of things that you could use for establishing root of trust, I think another class of those is ones where there's been some association through the real world to establish trust, whether it's like scanning a QR code or pressing a button on the two devices to establishing a pairing. And so there are some ways, even in the kind of home network environment or the coffee shop environment, to do that as trust establishment. And in many cases, you might say this is totally out of scope. Where maybe of at least some related interest here is given the association between naming and trust establishment, we may and how naming is a big part of what users are interacting with trust. It's something where we may want to think about it sooner rather than later, even if it's kind of post ADD.
Thank you very much, Eric. Tommy Pauly, please.
Yeah, so in response to Ecker's question, I mean, yes, if an attacker can inject UDP, of course they could do DHCP or DNS. They still seem a bit different to me. Doing the man-in-the-middle attack for DHCP is a much more active thing that you have to do. Some of the models for just injecting one DNS packet to someone to get them to use some DOS server that you choose is a lighter weight attack. As people mentioned, also, there are the guards for DHCP and RA that exist somewhere. We can't rely on that all the time, but at least it's something. And then a larger point, if you are already attacking my DHCP traffic and are being the man in the middle, you're already choosing my DO53 resolver, and you essentially are already my network provider, and I may as well trust you as much as I trust the network I don't trust any other way, right? You are my cafe network, and maybe it's a legit one, maybe it's a fake one. But I think there are models in which you could attack me in a way that I would have otherwise been better off to just use the DO53 router address that I had, the resolver address that I had, because that one was legitimate, and now you're redirecting me to something else that is an attacker's encrypted DNS server. So that's really the attack I want to avoid here, and say that if you already control the unencrypted DNS server, I'm less interested in preventing that attack.
Thank you.
So Tommy is from the chair. Can I ask for clarification for the notes, in particular on that point you just made? So when you say you're not interested in that attack, which specific attack could you sort of lay it out from end to end?
Right. So essentially, the attacker that is controlling your network provisioning entirely, right? They've
injected your DHCP responses or RAs, if they are controlling both the resolver address for unencrypted UDP DNS and the one that you're using for encrypted DNS to DO or DOT, that's an attack I think that we can't solve without some other form of trust, because they are controlling everything here. So the attack I am interested in protecting against is when I would have used for whatever value of legitimate you want, legitimate UDP resolver, that you're redirecting me to an attacker's encrypted DNS resolver.
Okay, so to be clear then, so it would be the traditional 53 DNS would be, in your scenario, considered trusted or reliable, but the threat is a DO server, encrypted or an encrypted DNS server that is under control by a nefarious party.
Right. The attack is when you get me to go to an encrypted DNS server that is not run by the same entity as the unencrypted DNS server. If they're the same, I'm not interested in solving that one in this group.
Okay, thank you, Tommy.
Now, Kiru, please.
Sorry, guys, I realized I was on mute. I agree with most of the comments from Tommy, especially because I think the industry has been dealing with DHCP-based attacks for quite a while, and they have security services like DHCP Guard or RA-Guard to especially protect from DHCP responses coming from attackers, and that's pretty easy to deal with, and we've been doing that. But unfortunately, I agree that the client never knows whether the network has deployed such services. But yeah, I agree with Tommy when he says that if the DHCP and RA are spoke, that means you're actually connecting to some other access point, and you have no control on whom you're connecting to as a network provider. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiru. Ben Schwartz, please.
Hi, Ben Schwartz. I'm not swayed by the arguments about DHCP protection so far, because it seems like any network with built-in DHCP guards could equally well have built-in DNS guards. That distinction doesn't seem like one that we should focus on. The thing that seems most appealing to me here is to focus on fine-grained attacker capabilities. And the two that I brought up on the mailing list are transient to persistent upgrades. So are we creating a system where a transient attacker who briefly has the ability to inject packets can become a persistent attacker who gets to capture and modify all of your DNS traffic? And also essentially where in the network the attacker is able to act. And so this is in fact similar to what Tommy is talking about, maybe from a different perspective, where if you have an injection attacker who isn't on your link, but is, for example, on the link upstream of your recursive resolver, then they might be able to inject traffic into the recursive cache, but currently they can't hijack your whole connection. If we, for example, if we used one of our special use name-based proposals that would allow such an injection attacker to become a pervasive, persistent surveillance attacker. Those are the distinctions that I think about.
Did it again, because I've got truck noise outside my house, so I had to mute myself again. So I'm sorry about that. But Eric Orth, please.
Yeah, I think the one area we keep sort of glossing over in all these discussions is sort of who we're authenticating. There's sort of the general concept of, oh, we're supposed to make sure that we're getting this DHCP information or whatever information from whoever is supposed to be getting it. We haven't really agreed on who that is. And I think a lot of this is use case specific. In a lot of use cases, the client might know some specific entity they want to get the information from. Maybe they want it from the ISP, maybe they want it from a specific enterprise, something like that. And in a lot of those cases, well, we have to create the authentication mechanisms for that specific use case, but the underlying auth mechanisms are a fairly easy problem. You know who you want, so you probably have a name for them, and we just got to authenticate that name through DNSSEC or certs or whatever. The more general case, though, is just sort of, do we authenticate that the network is giving us information that from whoever is supposed to be providing information from the network? And I don't think this is really an authentication problem, because from the client's perspective, they don't know who that is. They just need to trust the network to control it and only allow through information from the proper sources. But even though this is not an authentication problem, we still have all the same security issues a lot of people have been talking about. We need to make sure attackers can't replace things with things that weren't allowed to replace it before. And so I think really the only way to protect against this is to stick within communication mechanisms that the network already knows to guard against, things like staying within DHCP as much as possible, because the network knows how to control and make sure only the proper network authority is able to give DHCP and be able to block other stuff. But yeah, if you invent brand new mechanisms, the network doesn't know to control that, and people can get in signals that couldn't get through before. And even though there's no real authentication story, attackers that didn't have power before now might have power, and then we've made security worse. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Eric. Eric Ecker, please.
Yeah, so I thought the most interesting thing Tommy said was, that's made things interesting, was that you shouldn't, the idea is the idea of not allowing this attacker to be situation worse by steering you to resolve you otherwise wouldn't have used. And I think that's an interesting way to frame this, because it may open up the solution space quite a bit. So as a concrete example, if you're willing to be happy with the IP address, you could simply do effectively opportunistic probing, and then you wouldn't need signaling at all. And so the question is, and what does signaling do? The signaling either tells you, well, there is an available resolver, or in some potentially authoritative way, or potentially tells you it's over here instead of over here. This isn't fully formed, but I think trying to figure out exactly what we're trying to accomplish would be helpful here. Another thing worth mentioning is that there's a the problem with the DHCP guards is the client has no idea whether the DHCP guards are in place or not. And so if you think DHCP is insecure, and contrary to Tommy's opinion, then relying on it doesn't work, because you don't know if the guards are in place, and therefore you could be forced into something worse. So fine to have mechanisms which don't make the system better but can't make it worse, but having mechanisms which can make the system both better and worse, and then you can't tell what security is in place, that's no good.
Thank you, Ecker. Warren Kamari, please.
Thank you. So two quick things on the DHCP thing. One, something which I think we seem to forget is, in order for an attacker to do a useful DHCP injection, they almost always have to actually be local to where the client is, right? They need to be on the same layer 2 network, which is a fairly large change from a normal attack model. The other thing is, I guess, worth reiterating that almost all Wi-Fi networks or Wi-Fi kit already have DHCP guard type functionality built in, as do almost all switches. They already have it existing, and in many cases turned on by default. Yes, there's no way for the client to know that. I fully agree with Ecker. But I think this might be another case of the perfect becoming the enemy of the good. At the moment, we have nothing, because we keep getting up in the sort of situation of how do we solve this for everyone? and maybe at some point, you know, an initial, we can solve it for some set of people some of the time, and that ain't bad.
Thank you, Warren. Kiro again, please.
Hello. Yeah, I was about to say what Ryan was saying, and I totally agree with him. And one thing I like about DHCP is it's not just being local and because of the layer 2 protection that you get. In cases if DHCP is not available, maybe we should consider multiple discovery options like giving DHCP higher priority and then falling back to DNS, because DNS could be coming from any external entity and could be subjected to external attacks. So maybe that a fallback mechanism that we consider, because I've seen several protocols today supporting several discovery mechanisms and not just one. So I think having multiple discovery mechanisms and having a precedence between them would be a way of making progress to handle the various deployment cases that we've been discussing, whether the home router can be upgraded or cannot be upgraded.
Thank you, Kieran. Martin Thompson, please.
Yes, so Ben hit on something that I think was really kind of interesting. He suggested that he wasn't convinced at all by the DHCP arguments that we've been putting forth and the ones that Tommy put out, and then talked about what abilities does the attacker gain by mounting a particular attack, and identified one particular attack with the special use domain names that was potentially quite interesting and exposes a vulnerability there that I think has been highlighted as one of the many things that special use domain names have problems with. But with DHCP, I still can't see any specific way that an attacker can gain something that they don't already have. If the attacker is able to tell you what your DO53 server is, then it's game over as far as I'm concerned in terms of resolver selection. So I don't know why we would expect a higher degree of security for something that we're building here than the configuration protocol that you're already using.
Thank you, Martin. Paul Hoffman, please.
So I would like to mix what Tiru said with what Martin said, which is that there may be a hierarchy of precedence of which ones we suggest people use, and in that hierarchy, there may only, the user at the moment, may only have one possibility. So I think that the idea of doing everything in DHCP or doing everything in the resolver or whatever is probably not good, and we can easily describe multiple things, and then the working group can say the order that, you know, because of the attacks that we are concerned with and how many we are concerned with, and as Ecker keeps bringing up, how good we expect, you know, what percentage of users we expect to be able to use any solution, can be prioritized in a start with this. If you can do it, great. If you can't, then go to this. That seems like a reasonable model that we don't have to start with. We aren't going to know all of these initially, but if we assume, as Chiro said, that we're going to have more than one, I think that that's a reasonable way to move forward.
Thank you, Paul. Glenn Bean, please.
So one comment I would like to make, not wearing a chair hat, it might be useful for people who are concerned about specific DHCP attack scenarios, and I think Warren made some very good points. If you don't think that Warren's sort of observation of what you need to actually make that successful helps limit the attack service, maybe you could post the list, you know, references to documented attacks so the larger group can understand your concerns better. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Glenn. Kira, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think in addition to considering the insecure discovery mechanisms like DHCP or especially as an domain, right? I think of our draft with regard to cryptographic assertions. But if you look at the work happening in RAT's working group with regard to cryptographic assertions, similar to the way I think Firefox and Chrome have pre-configured public resolvers in the browsers, which they have done quite an amount of background verification before adding them into that background verification with some cryptographic assertions proving that it's an legitimate organization, right, would reduce the attack vectors to some extent, while an attacker could easily, for example, get a self-signed certificate and say, hey, I am an encrypted, I'm hosting. It may not be able to solve all the attack vectors, but it definitely reduces the easy attacks that an attacker could launch, claiming to be hosting an encrypted resolver from an organization and asking the users to correct it.
Thank you, Tiru. And that is the current end of the queue. And Glenn and I had been talking on the side to take a break right at the top of the hour. And we're 3 minutes short of the hour. So with the queue having been run for the moment, good time to get some coffee, gather your thoughts for what you want to bring to the mic next. And we will see you at 10 after the hour. Thank you.
So this is Warren. I wasn't paying attention. When are we coming back? What time after the hour?
10 minutes after the hour.
Awesome. Thank you. And apologies for not using +Q, -Q. I figured there's nobody doing actual stuff. So,
Warren, you are looking at the screen, aren't you?
I would have ignored your attempt to.
Yes, but it says 10-minute break.
Right.
If you didn't know when that started.
Right. And in fact, it's only a 13-minute break. So.
I got sucked down the rabbit hole of buying replacement bits for my espresso machine because something. I'm sure everybody needed to know that.
I did.
Oh, excellent. How are you?
You must tell us
Yeah.
more about your espresso machine.
Oh dear. Now you've gone down the rabbit hole.
No, don't get him started.
I will remind everybody that we are being recorded. So
thank you. So I've got one of the decent machines, and no affiliation, etc. Blah blah blah. You know, especially seeing as we're being recorded, they work really well, and I'm really happy with it. However, it's now getting a little bit. So the group head gasket is starting to get old and dry, so I'm getting a replacement one of those. I have actually had to do a couple of repairs on it because I got one of the very, very, very first models or instances. I think it's like serial number 7 or something. But what's incredibly nice about them is they've made improvements over time. And so I got an email being like, here's a list of things which we've upgraded. Give us your address and we will ship them to you. And this included a bunch of like little things like the spring that holds the filter in the portafilter, upgraded flow meters. I can't remember what, but it was.
It sounds like it's
10 or 12
digital.
bits.
Is it one of those
Oh, yeah,
IoT, one of those IoT smart things?
Yeah, I mean it is.
What's its host name?
So what it is it runs. It's got an Android tablet attached to the top of it, and then they've replaced the UI with their own thing. It's actually written in Tickle, and all of the sources available online, so you can futz with it yourself. But what's nice is they've got a PID control right at the head. So they've got a heating element right in the head itself, and a PID like temperature or a thermistor right next to it. And then they do PWM to control the pump itself. So the machine will actually emulate a whole bunch of different other machines. They can provide the same temperature and flow profiles for a bunch of different
I'm
machines.
laughing
So you
because
can make it emulate.
I'm imagining that your espresso machine can emulate like your toaster. Or can with enough CPU, it can also be a refrigerator.
Yep.
I'm asking because my wife's favorite machine broke on her, and it's something subtle inside of it involving the pump, right? And we've never found anybody to fix it successfully. We have been through 2 additional machines, each one of which are functional, but don't work anywhere as near as the first one did when it was working. And the original one is sitting there next to the cupboard, forlornly waiting for someone to figure out how. I can't even figure out how to take it apart, let alone.
What brand machine is it?
I have to go upstairs and look because I'm not the espresso genius, but I'll ask you for your details, Unicast. But I'm just,
I mean,
it's a good conversation for the break since I've already had 2 coffees and I shouldn't have any more.
Yeah. I mean, these machines are not cheap, but they are really, 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 really nice. It was originally actually a Kickstarter where the original person ran off with everybody's money. It was originally CPM Espresso. Sorry, allegedly ran off with everyone's money. There was a whole thing on Wired on it.
I never got my cooler either.
Yeah. After that collapsed, somebody new came in and bought the IPR or something. I can't remember the exact sequence of events, and gave all the original backers a good discount. He's a really nice, like incredibly friendly sort of community feel to it. But yeah, like by far the nicest espresso machine I've ever seen or played with. So
thank you for the information.
No worries. I mean, as I say, mine's a really old one at this point. I'm having a bit of trouble with the USB port, and so I contacted them and it was like, oh, yeah. Some of the earlier ones had weird issues with USB cables. We'll just ship you a new one. It's all good.
It's no longer available, according to this email.
Someone's unmuted in the background, just mentioning in case they say something embarrassing. Actually, I should have kept quiet in case they say something embarrassing.
Look to see who's talking anyway, so you can in the participants.
Congratulations on still being awake, Mark.
Yeah, the dogs wake me at 6 in the morning, so it's now 18 hours after the dogs have woken me up. And they wake me every morning about at dawn, so I don't need an alarm clock. Oh, it's lovely.
What's the weather like over there?
It's been lovely. It's just about t-shirt weather at night. So.
Excellent. And I'm guessing, unlike the West Coast, your sky is not dark red at the moment.
Yeah, my sky is nice and clear. Had a good look at the Southern Cross tonight. I'm a cub leader, so had a cub meeting tonight. Well, actually, had 2 cub meetings.
And those are still happening in person?
Yeah, we're allowed to have 20 people at a time.
Okay.
So the cub pack is a little over 20. So rather than having a 1 hour and a half meeting, we have 2 1-hour meetings back to back.
Okay. And
So
how's the COVID situation in Melbourne? Because
it's
as I remember, that was not good.
it appears to be coming under control. The numbers are coming down. Nowhere like they're nowhere near what they are in the US, but yeah.
Yeah, well, US.
Yeah.
I mean, yay, America. Sorry.
But the world always needs a what is it, like a reference of, like, there's ways of doing it right and there's ways of doing it wrong. So you have the A/B test.
We're the
America's the B test.
We're the control group. What would have happened if you had not?
Oh my
attempted to
God, that's hilarious.
No, well, New South Wales, we're getting reports, the whole state, usually single digits each day of new reports, and about half of them usually returning travellers from somewhere overseas. They're all going into quarantine hotels for 14 days at their expense. So to travel out of Australia at the moment, first of all, you've got to get permission to leave the country, and then to come back in, you've got to be able to find a flight, because they're only bringing in 500 or 600 a week or something like that. And then you've got to pony up about $5,000 for your 2 weeks of 5,000 plus for your 2 weeks of quarantine, hotel quarantine. So at this rate, I'm not getting to another IETF until either there's a vaccine or a hell of a lot more people in the world have had it and there's herd immunity.
So, Mark, you are obligated to go into one of these designated quarantine hotels, as opposed to in Canada, you promise that you're going to quarantine and they check on you daily, but you can do it at your own house if
No, you don't get a choice.
Okay,
You
so
are-
interesting.
And
I wondered if hotels would start offering that facility, but obviously in Australia they were obligated to, or they were.
Yeah, the government, the state governments have booked hotels, but we have to pay. You have to pay for the privilege. And
I mean, it seems like that's like if I was running a hotel, it seems like that would be a great way to keep my hotel full, and potentially like I could bump the rates up somewhat. Maybe,
No.
because people aren't going to find it on Priceline.
No,
it doesn't work like that.
The rate is the same regardless of whether you're in a 2-star hotel or a 5-star hotel.
Okay.
If you're lucky, you get a 5-star hotel with a lovely view of Sydney Harbour.
Okay, guys, I'm glad we've gotten our hallway chat in, but now we're ringing the bell and going to resume.
Okay.
Well, in particular, check in the
presumably
hallway,
when
and
it's back.
all the cookies have been eaten, and so I'm going to start eating.
And we are all now fatter.
So, I think that was a pretty good conversation from what I've seen in checking through the notes and hearing sort of the direction it took. I feel like we made progress in capturing a lot of issues, and compared to what I saw on the list over the last 6 months to 8 months, where the issue of DHCP came up, I think this actually was pretty successful in drilling down into the nitty-gritty parts of it and people's concerns. So I'm very happy with that. I would suggest we seem to have sort of come to a close on that local discovery and model discussion. Thank you, Ecker, for raising it. It was a very good question to get things started with. So let us move then back to what was the first question. And I think we've covered this somewhat, but let's just close out on it. Can DHCP play a role in discovery? They're a very simple question to the group to discuss. And I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this because we've already spent a good amount of discussion already. But just that simple question, if people would like to weigh in, do you think DHCP can play a role in discovery successfully?
Okay, excellent question. But before you even asked it, Vinny had joined the queue.
Yeah, sorry. Let's just move forward. I had a question for clarification earlier. Let's go ahead and move forward.
Okay. So queue is wide open. Paul Watters, please.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
You asked the question, can DHCP play an important role? And my answer was yes.
Understood now. Okay. Are we about to get a long line of this? Possibly. Jim Reed.
This is not meant to be a vote. This is just to try to sort of get people to wait.
Right. We're trying to get a sense of the room.
Heck no.
Right. Yes. We don't even have the humming tool. Jim Reed says yes. Mark,
It's
Andrew,
going to have to make security considerations, but yes, it can play a role.
Okay. So here's the thing, the most negative response so far, and I don't mean to characterize it as negative, but Ecker's given us a maybe. Everybody else, so it sounds like at least we're pushing in the direction. It's worth discussing, unless somebody starts getting violently opposed to it, then we will have to consider that. And Dan Geist has joined the queue, please. Well, actually, I skipped over Mike. Mike Bishop, I didn't know if you were just saying yes also. So, Mike, if you have something more to say, please contribute it now.
It's a yes, but.
Okay.
So I think it can certainly play a role. The issue is that anything we stuff in DHCP, and I don't think we're going to get authenticated DHCP in this group. I don't think we should be pursuing that. Then anything in the DHCP is no more trusted than what we have today. So I think it can play a role in discovery, but I think we also need to think about what is that security model that we've been talking about? What benefit do we actually get? And is DHCP the right tool to start with? I'm not sure it's where we should start, but I think it can play a role.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. And then skipping over all the yes that just got in chat. Now it's Dan Geist, please. Warren, you're watchmaking or something?
That wasn't me.
Okay.
I would echo what Mike said, that I think DHCP is absolutely a valid option. And there are caveats, obviously, grains of salt, et cetera. And it may not provide the security level in every circumstance and every use case. But I think that to the point made in the previous session, if we're trying to solve every use case, we won't ever get anything done. And if we have a reasonable level of expectation of security with DHCP today, then we should at least explore what's required to do DOA to DOT or any resolver discovery that way.
Thank you, Dan. Tommy Pauly.
Yeah, so the short answer I have is yes, because if, as I stated earlier, the guarantee that I want to get is that whatever discovery mechanism we have is no worse than what we get from DHCP. Putting it in DHCP is obviously no worse than that. But I think, as several people have commented on Jabber, there's a but there, and I think it's not something we should necessarily focus too much time on because it seems fairly simple to add in there, and it for more like deployment model reasons and upgrading boxes, it doesn't seem like it'll give us the widest spread benefit short term. So we should probably certainly define it, but we should focus on other mechanisms that will help us deploy sooner first.
Thank you, Tommy. Eric Orth, please.
Yeah, I'm another yes, but I'm sure DHCP has a pretty strong role and can be used in a lot of different mechanisms and use cases, but also we should keep in mind that DHCP can't be the only mechanism or the root of all of our mechanisms, stuff like that, because a lot of the clients are in different positions. And just speaking for Chrome, Chrome doesn't currently look at DHCP. I don't see us likely looking at DHCP in the general cases. We're doing other stuff like just getting the configuration from the OS, and sure, indirectly that's DHCP because oftentimes it gets it from DHCP, but other times not. And so we can't assume that DHCP will be the root of all solutions. It's just going to be one part of the problem, and different clients are going to have different needs and going to need to get their discovery information from different sources.
Hey, Glenn here, jumping in with my chair hat. So, Eric, let me ask for clarification on that. So, I get it, what you said about Chrome, and I'm wondering, is there one of the issues being that we have some of the space being the application, which doesn't see DHCP messages, it's separated out from that, versus other implementations, which might be at the operating system level, which then potentially could have a much more interaction with DHCP. Is that sort of those different modalities giving some of the concern here, maybe?
I don't know if it'll be 100%, but there's probably a very strong correlation that applications are probably more likely to be interested in one thing, OS is another, but I'm sure it can come down to specifics of the use case of the individual client, whatever it is. Like some clients, even if they're in the application space, yeah, sure, we could look at DHCP, but just for various reasons and various policies that are obviously out of scope for this group, the client may choose not to. And it comes down to the individual case for the client. So clients are going to need different solutions, and some clients aren't going to want to look at DHCP.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And Glenn? Move on.
I'll say thank you to Eric.
Martin Thompson, please.
Yeah, so Tommy said most of what I was going to say. I think Eric touched on one of the reasons that I think DHCP, though it might be an easy win, will be insufficient. That being that applications might not be able to get it. The other reason that clients may not be able to get DHCP is the prevalence of forwarders and those little boxes that don't get updated, that won't be passing on DHCP options or other configuration options from upstream. So I have a box that pulls its configuration over PPP OA, maybe it might be OE, I can't remember which. And unless we both modify that protocol and modify the box, we're not going to be propagating that information down. So I would say yes, but like many others.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Kira, please.
As to DHCP, I think DHCP can be supplemented with other mechanisms like trust on first use, so that some of the attacks that have been discussing that later when an internal attack happens, at least there would be a way for client to identify that, assuming an attacker typically is not always on path and may creep in later due to some vulnerability. I think trust on first use would help at least identify and detect some of those threats. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira. Paul Wetters, please.
So for most networks that you connect to, DHCP is as secure as the entire network. Like most Wi-Fi networks are now segmented. You can't like spoof your fellow participant on the network. So basically, if I join a Starbucks network, I can trust as much as I can trust a random Starbucks network, I can trust a random DHCP server to give me a hint. And that hint can then later be used for me making a decision whether or not I'm going to give that network enough trust for my encrypted DNS, or whether I will try to, use the network only to relay encrypted packets and just use it as a transport layer and not trust it for anything. So I think it's useful for the network to be able to give out that information. Whether trusted or not is completely independent of that decision.
Thank you, Paul. Tommy Jensen.
Thank you. So actually, Paul just touched on nuance I wanted to bring up, which is yes, but information coming over DHCP should not be used to change the trust level of a server. It's a convenience that can be used to advertise the metadata necessary to connect to an encrypted DNS server. And that will help protect against late arriving attackers to a network, among other things. But we shouldn't be using DHCP as a way to convey information that we will then use to establish greater trust than we had before.
Just to jump in and answer that. So that all comes down to whether you trust that network or not, right?
Yep, exactly. Yep. And that was true before, and it would continue to be true after we build a DHCP-based mechanism for connecting to an encrypted DNS server.
Right.
Great. Thank you. Paul Hoffman.
So to pile on and maybe cut this a little bit shorter, does everyone agree that do all the people who are saying yes or yes, but agree that any use of DHCP will be insecure, unauthenticated use of DHCP? Because if so, I think we can just move on.
Oh, sorry. You mean that the information that DHCP gives you might be unauthenticated, but it might still be a hint to get to an authenticated source.
Exactly right. Exactly right. That is that we are not, since a few people have said, oh, I don't know if we can add, secure, make DHCP more secure or whatever, that we simply say we're not going to try, and therefore we already know exactly the level of trust.
Yes, I think you're right. There's no point in securing the DHCP.
Okay. Thank you for that exchange. Jim Reed, please.
Thanks, Dale. Just a clarification. An earlier speaker talked about the security model. I think we need to be careful here that we're realizing there's not going to be a single overarching security model or security solution to all this discovery stuff. So there may well be one that applies for the DHCP use case, but there'll be another security model for some other kind of discovery mechanism, whatever that might be. So I think we should be very, very careful about how we're talking about these things, because we may be getting ourselves in this trap yet again of trying to look for an overarching solution for a general thing, which probably is unachievable. And we should maybe recognize that there will be multiple security models and multiple threat models, depending on the individual use cases or potential scenarios that could be looked at. I think we should be careful to capture that information, make sure that we all understand we're working towards the same thing. Cheers.
Thank you, Jim. Daniel Miguel.
Yeah, so considering the responses from whether DHCP should be included or not, I think I'd like to echo what Eric Orth just mentioned, is that, yeah, I see DHCP as a way to carry some bootstrapping information to perform a discovery protocol, rather than being completely part of that discovery protocol itself. So in that sense, I mean, we should have a discovery protocol that can be provisioned with DHCP or some other mechanisms, like reading directly in the OS. Or so that's what I'd like to say, that DHCP should not be completely banned from bootstrapping a discovery protocol, but it should not be the only mechanism as well.
Thank you, Daniel. And I believe that there's some other messages interspersed here, but if you If you think you were in the queue and I have somehow missed you, please add yourself to the queue again. Otherwise, we're at the end of the current queue, but we might at least be getting some direction as to starting to have a more meaningful, perhaps not right now, DHCP conversation. Okay, Glenn, I'm not seeing anyone else queuing on this topic right now. And we have slightly over an hour of our scheduled time left. Glenn, please pick up where you want to head next.
Yeah, sure. And so to that comment, I think these discussing topics like this can be kind of exhausting, especially not in person. So I think we should probably limit today's session to only 2 hours and let certain participants get an extra half hour of sleep maybe. So we seem to have covered DHCP very well. I think we've, in fact, in the last conversation here just now, touched upon the whole second part of that question, which is what authentication does the work feel is needed? And Paul, I think, made some great comments. Paul Hoffman made some great comments on that. So let's move on to sort of jump it away from DHCP discovery. Let's talk about authentication. The next question, which is question number 2 on the slide. What is authentication's role in resolver discovery and validation? So the DHCP and the network bootstrapping aside, would people like to comment on what they feel is the needed role here as part of the discovery and validation process of successfully selecting, not selecting, but you know what I mean, like successfully discovering and then making a choice ultimately on what resolvers you will talk to. What do you see as authentication's role in that, or the need for it? And by the way, the answer may be don't need any. It's already taken care of in the protocol when you do other validations.
So Glenn, you know those moments when we're in a live meeting and half the room stands up to join the mic line when somebody says something? Paul Hoffman, please start it off.
Thank you. I'm going to start off with an apology because this question that says, you know, what is the role in discovery and validation? For those of you who aren't completely native English speakers, it sounds like discovery and validation are one thing there, and that's partially due to the draft that Puneet and I put in. One thing that's completely clear to me now, and I apologize for not having seen it ahead of time, is those two are completely different topics, or can be separated by people more careful than I was. And we should not discuss them. We should not discuss the role for discovery and validation. We should discuss authentication's role for discovery and authentication's role for validation. So please separate them out. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Martin Thompson.
So I think that Ben Schwartz hit on this during the lengthy discussion that we had previously, which is that if there is any authentication involved in this process, then that authentication is involved to the extent that it is necessary to prevent an attacker from gaining additional privileges that would not otherwise be available to them. So in the DHCP case, I don't think that there's any pressing need to add additional authentication other than what is provided in the configuration protocol. But in the case where we look to alternative solutions, such as those that might use talking to the resolver itself, then we might need to examine authentication for the purposes of ensuring that the DNS interactions aren't tampered with, because the DNS interactions become a critical part of the discovery process.
Thank you, Martin. Ben, please. Ben?
I was transcribing Martin's comment.
Okay.
But I think Ecker is ahead of me in the queue.
He dropped.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that one way that might help to think about this is to think about this as maintaining certain invariants. So essentially DHCP gives us certain properties. I think that one role that authentication can play is to essentially make sure that we don't violate those properties. I think about this, I like Ecker's formulation that we're looking for solutions that can make things better and can't make things worse. So can't make things worse. That's I think an important role for authentication. And then another role that I haven't heard discussed about authentication is about use cases where the client wishes to surface an identity to the user. Or in some cases where the user has actually specified an identity, but especially in cases where the network has encountered some resolver and the user would like to know what resolver am I using. In order to, for most user interfaces today don't make any great attempt to answer that question, but if we really want to answer that securely, then we need some kind of authenticated identity for the resolver itself.
Is that it then?
Yep, that's all.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Tommy Jensen, please.
Thank you. So I think Paul was right in separating these as separate topics. And so I'll answer my opinion to each. I don't believe that authentication plays a role in discovery because discovery today is unauthenticated. And I think to add authentication to discovery implies that we're authenticating that someone is advertising a specific server. I don't think that's a road to success. Having said that, part of validation to me is if I discover a server that is a classic DNS server, validating that when I talk to it and I bootstrap our way into an encrypted connection, validating that the original server I was talking to and the encrypted connection I now have were the same is important, and authentication plays a role there.
Great, thank you, Tommy. Tommy Pauly.
Hi, yeah, so I agree with Tommy Jensen. I think the authentication is for validation, not for discovery. And I think what we need to validate is the identity of the resolver that we got from whatever provisioning mechanism we had. So that could be the user's choice, like they typed in 8.8.8.8 into their DNS settings, or it came from a provisioning protocol like DHCP. And if the thing that we already know, if that identity is a name or like the URL template for DO, we don't have to do anything more because DO and DOT already take care of that. The cases we're interested in here are the ones where we are provisioned only with an address, and in that case, we need to authenticate that address. And so we can have other hints for the URI templates or the ports or whatever else we need for DO or DOT. But what we need to authenticate during the validation step is the identity that we originally got, which could just be an address like someone had typed in quad 8 or I had some address from DHCP.
Great. Thank you very much. Ecker, please.
Yeah, I think I largely agree with what Tom was saying. I guess I try to phrase it a little differently, perhaps, but I think it comes down to the same thing, which is that for the purposes of this discussion, we are treating whatever DHCP tells you as authenticated. And so DHCP can tell you anything it wants, including like a full like URI template or including like, you know, or whatever. And then we can fall back to like, and so we can assume we can fall back to whatever conventional authentication mechanisms we'd have, you know, if you've been given a URI template, for instance. The more interesting problem is the situation where what's been fed into the system, because I mean, I'm taking as part of this discussion, as Tommy said, that if DHC is compromised, you're already host. The more interesting question is, as Tommy says, when you were given an IP address and which is basically the only thing you're given otherwise. You're given it otherwise, and then how to establish that the person you're talking to is in some sense the same person or controlled by the same people or the same origin or whatever as the thing that would have been associated with the DO53 endpoint. I do want to push back slightly, Tommy, on the suggestion that that should include being able to having malleability in the URI template, because I can imagine some serious problems there. But I think otherwise, I'm generally on board with what you said.
Yeah.
I'm not yet sure I understand how to establish that they're the same person, though I do think that the suggestion of having a certificate with a SAN that has the same IP has somewhat compelling, though of course it doesn't work with 1918 addresses.
Okay. Thank you, Ecker. Ralph Weber, please.
Yeah, for in-band kind of authentication, you could also think about something token-based. But one thing I wanted to stress is we are talking about DHCP, but just to be precise, I assume we're also including IPv6 route announcement and maybe also provisioning domains as sort of local bootstrap mechanisms here. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Ralph. Paul Hoffman, please.
So thank you, Ecker. I got in the queue, but to say something similar, specifically about IP address, since the question is authentication with IP addresses. When Puneet and I had proposed the res info stuff earlier, one of the things we got beaten up on fairly quickly was, oh, well, there are no CAs that, issue certs for IP addresses. Which isn't true, but it is approximately true. And some IP addresses you can never get a certificate for because they are in the private address space, which is absolutely true. This goes back to Ecker's question, how much of a solution do we want? Like if it covers N%, are we good enough? And it also, I think, speaks to where the trust anchors, because today, as far as I can tell, you can get web PKI certificates with IP addresses from a very small number of certificate authorities. That number is likely to grow and not shrink, but it is a small subset of the pile of certs that a browser has. Some operating systems have piles the same size as the browsers. Some have much smaller piles. So this is really going to come down to where are our trust anchors. I think we can still move forwards with it, and I think that personally, I am okay with a solution, a DNS-based solution that excludes if your resolver has a private address space. In the same way that, quite frankly, that resolver will also likely have names in it that are not resolvable in the full DNS and such. I think we have to buy into the idea that private is private and then move on.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Vittorio, please.
Thanks. Well, I just had a comment on the question about authentication, which is that you really need to define authentication of what. I mean, and this unfortunately changes depending on what your deployment model is. Because if your model is that you get a DOH URI or an IP address from the user or from the client itself, then of course you need to authenticate that you are speaking to actually to that address or to that URI. But in the same provider auto upgrade deployment model, you need to authenticate is just that you are actually talking to the same entity which was running the unencrypted resolver. You don't really know to identify who they are or to know who is actually running that couple of resolvers. And in that case, the solution might be even technically slightly different from a solution you would employ to authenticate the identity of who is running a resolver or the fact that it's actually responding to a certain IP address. So yeah, I think we might need going forward to separate the two questions. So I mean, authenticating the identity versus authenticating the relationship.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vittorio. And I will note that we currently have 2 people in the queue, but we're intending to close the queue right after Daniel. So if you do have a last minute, because Glenn wanted to cover just a few more things before the end of the meeting. But I'll give a chance if somebody needs to slide in under the wire. Tiru, please.
I would prefer names for authentication than IP addresses, because IP addresses keep changing, because we're seeing quite a few places where ISPs keep changing your IPv6 addresses quite often. So if you have these v6 addresses, it's quite difficult to again reacquire certs, and especially with regard to talking to CA and getting a cert using ACME. And the other problem is what I see is that if there is a name, it's very easy for the user to identify. Say it's provided by my network security vendor, or it's provided by my ISP. Rather, if it is just an IP address, the user may not be able to relate to who is providing the DNS resolver.
Thank you, Tiru. Daniel, please.
So, well, I'd like to echo what Vittorio just mentioned, is that the question is, I mean, at least to me, it's not that clear. And so I might respond out of scuff, but in a word, what I'd like to mention is that I believe that the discovery protocol should be based on authenticated information, because then, I mean, the purpose of the discovery is to be able to proceed to a selection. That said, how we bootstrap that discovery might rely, if we have no other cases or no other options, rely on non-authenticated information. So that's my how I perceive the things.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. And Ecker will get the last word on this topic before Glenn shuffles us off to the next.
So, I mean, I think that I want to focus briefly on the case where you're unable to use DHCP for provisioning. So in that case, you have whatever provisioning information you have, which in this case is an IP address. So it's either, for additional provisioning. So either you have a DHCP supplied IP address, or you have someone typed in 888 into their into their computer or whatever, right? And so in that case, it seems to me that there are roughly speaking 2 scenarios, right? One is you have a trustworthy catalog of IP addresses which actually will run DO and dot resolvers, and the other is you do not. And the case where you have to determine in band whether or not this IP address determines DO and dot resolvers, you're necessarily exposed to downgrade attacks from the attacker who controls the DNS. I think the path here is IP address, determine whether or not DO and dot is supported, and then connect with DO and dot and try to authenticate. But it's important to think about exactly which paths you're attempting to block for the attacker from doing. And as far as I can tell, unless you have an out-of-band mechanism like the same provider or upgrade mechanism that Google and Microsoft are using, it's not possible to run downgrade attacks by an attacker who controls the DNS, the local network. So we'll probably just have to live with that unless someone figures something out. I haven't.
Thank you, Ecker. Over to you, Glenn.
Okay, well, that was some very good conversation. Thank you. I also, being cognizant of the time, I'm trying to move us along. So, of course, we can continue these discussions on lists, and we should. I'd like to move on to question number 3 and a little bit of question number 4. This notion that there would be some affiliation or association around resolvers, different resolvers, it keeps coming up. It's come up in this conversation just now. So I'd like to spend a few minutes getting the group's thoughts on what they see as, is that something that's needed? And what role would authentication play in that? Since obviously if you're going to trust that affiliation, that association, you in some way will need to authenticate that. So, and if you want to also drift into a little bit of the question number 4, and they're broken out by Justin, by Vittorio, that there really is 2 questions here. There is this affiliation notion, but then the other question is are you affiliating at the organization level, Are you affiliated just at the server level, or is it affiliation across different orgs where you might have this org says, I trust that other org? So let's put these notions together and discuss.
Okay. Ben Schwartz, please.
Hi. So I'm going to use the word DHCP here, but I don't mean DHCP specifically. I mean something more general about authentication and discovery flows. I think that we don't need this inside DHCP. That is, I see no reason why we should require that there's an affiliation between some described resolver inside DHCP and some other resolver also described inside DHCP. We don't have that constraint today. DHCP is capable of carrying a collection of unrelated resolvers. I think where we want this kind of constraint is when we are trying to do some sort of in-band post-DHCP upgrade. And the reason we want this constraint is related to specific attack models where we believe there is an attacker who could divert us to an incorrect resolver, and we are essentially trying to use DHCP as a temporary root of trust to say, okay, we'll use any resolver as long as we can trace it back into the DHCP, as long as it's essentially no worse than we would have done from the DHCP source. So that's what I think we're up to here. And I think that my favorite solution so far is to say effectively, if we're starting from only an IP address from our configuration source, whatever that might be, then you have to prove that you are equivalent to that IP address. And you could do that through a PKI, or you could also do it by being on that IP address. So for the RFC 1918 case, you don't have to get a certificate for your RFC 1918 address. You just have to operate on that address.
Thank you, Ben. Martin, please.
Yeah, I'm just going to plus one basically everything except that Ben said, except the last bit, which I'm going to think about a little bit longer. I think the reason that we might want, or I might suggest even need, that association is to deal with attacks and nothing more. If otherwise, if we're looking at a configuration protocol, we're just asking the network's opinion about what the resolver is, and there's no need for an association between different types of resolvers when that is our root of trust.
Thank you, Martin. Vittorio, please.
Yes, well, I am especially interested in this question because I think if you reduce it to the question, I mean, authenticating a relationship between a currently configured DO53 resolver and its DOH equivalent that you need to discover, and then this is what suits the currently, let's say, leading deployment model, the one that has been employed by Google and Microsoft. So I think that if we could find a way to make this work, even through a short-term solution which is still secure, then we could make a step forward in deployment pretty quickly. And then in parallel, of course, we can devise more general methods or methods for other use cases or so on. But I mean, I think that you can do this. I mean, you can authenticate this relationship securely using DNSSEC and TLSA and a number of existing technologies. And so I would focus on this as one of the most immediate use cases that could actually find deployment in the real world.
Grazie. Andrew Kempling, please.
Well, actually, Vittorio has pretty much preempted most of what I was going to say, so I'll just reiterate, I think the same provider auto upgrade, I think is where this is particularly important, but the rest has been covered by others, so I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Kiru, please.
If the DHCP is giving you a domain name, I think if it's hosted on the same IP address as DO53, it just solves two problems. One is that there is no need to perform another lookup to find out the IP address of the encrypted DNS server, And the second problem it resolves is finding the association whether these two are affiliated or not. So I think hosting them on the same IP address makes it quite simple and addresses several of the attacks that were discussed here.
Great, thank you, Tiru. Eric, Ecker, please.
Yeah, so I mean, Tommy and I were having a chat back and forth on Jabber with this. I think this once again this goes back to attacker model, and in particular we talk the point that Ben raised about the local IP addresses. I've not yet heard any mechanism that will allow you to authenticate, plausibly authenticate the local IP address resolver in a good way. There may perhaps you could invent one. So the question is it what's the value proposition of having a secure connection to the local resolver if you can't authenticate it in a way that ties back to itself? That ties back to the .5030 address you were given initially. It may have some value, but it depends. We'll have to really flesh out what the attack model was.
Thank you, Ecker. Eric.
Yeah, I just want to comment quickly on the comments that it would be an interesting validation of the relationship that the DO server is on the same IP address as the IP address that was used for the other stuff. Yes, that's probably a good mechanism in some cases, but we have to keep in mind it's not the only solution, because I keep hearing there's plenty of situations where it can't be hosted on the same IP for various reasons, maybe different server, maybe, I don't know. I think a lot of it comes into stuff around just routers acting as resolvers and things like that. But it's still an unsolved problem for the other cases where they can't be at the same IP. We still need some way to validate the relationship, whether that means figuring out the identity of the IP address and validating that and then matching it against the validation of the DO or DOT server, or some other mechanism of validating just the pure relationship. I think there's still room for more solutions in that space.
So Glenn here, I'd like to jump in and ask a clarification to both Eric and Ecker. Have you considered, when you're in these statements you just made, the potential, and I don't know anybody that's doing this, and I don't know anybody would want to do it, but that doesn't mean somebody won't, where we might have a DO server hosted on the same IP address, but at different URLs, because they're providing different levels of DO service off of the same server infrastructure, but they might have different URLs, so as to, I don't know, maybe have one that's malware filtered and one that's completely unfiltered. How does that play into when you talk about IP addresses and your discussion?
I mean, I think in this case you're using the fact that it's on the same IP address as a proxy for the relationship that the DO URL is at least to some extent associated with whoever is running the classic DNS server on that IP address. So even if there's multiple URLs, yeah, this is just a case of there's multiple DO or DOT servers that are associated with it. So you still have that relationship. It's just not a one-to-one relationship.
Yeah, I mean, so this is what I was alluding to earlier with respect to learning the URL with talking to Tommy. The key point is you can allow. Imagine you have two URLs. Imagine you have two URLs, one of which actually answers the question, and the other of which forwards the query to the attacker for the answer to the question. So obviously you can't allow the attacker to steer which URL you do. And I think if we're going to have a situation in which the IP address is used as the lookup key for the resolver, then it would have to be the case that that deterministically controls which URL template you use as well. And then you have to trust the DO server to separate those, to handle those templates properly in the same way that any HTTP server has to. But yeah, you can't use DNS, for instance, to look up the URI template based on the IP address, because then the attacker can attack you again.
Okay. Tiru, it's your turn at the moment. I'm not sure whether Ecker just kind of addressed or whether he's rejoining the queue on a separate topic, but let's go with Tiru for right now.
I think it's very easy for an ISP or a network security provider to host a DOH server or a DOT server and get a domain validated cert. right? I mean, there are various ways to automate that using Acme, and the ISP can get those certs and use the TR69 or any other secure management protocols they have to provision those managed routers, and you don't really need any new way of figuring out how do you get certificates for local IP addresses.
Okay, thank you, Tiru. Back to you, Glenn.
And there, I found the unmute button. Fastest so far today. Okay, well, that was some I thought really good discussion, and based upon conversations I've seen on lists, my sense is that this has helped clarify things significantly, and so that was very good. I'm looking at the time, and we did want to get people out of here, not going to the full 2.5 hours. So I am going to suggest that we actually carry over the other questions, number 6 and number 7, onto on list, and then also potentially for a future interim. I'd like to spend just a few minutes on number 8, which is not meant to be a deep discussion on authentication topics. What I'd like to understand is what other authentication aspects do we need to consider so that we can have these, in a bigger list that can then be put onto the discussion list and gather broader input. So if people could just comment on very briefly, what other authentication aspects need to be considered, but not go into great detail about them, please. And then that will be, when we've done that, we'll finish up and close out the session.
Thank you. Ecker, please.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if this is an authentication topic or not, but as I was just saying in the chat, one question I think we understand is it important for the client to be able to discern whether it is connected to a securely discovered and securely discovered DOS server or dot server. So, at the beginning, Tommy sort of opened by saying, well, let's not make the situation any worse. So like, if you were already connected to an insecure server, to an attacker, then you still are. But a number of these systems have the property, if they're designed under specific designs, that you might be upgraded to an encrypted connection to what you think is they think is the same person, and actually is the same person, actually is the attacker. But then, which is fine as long as you don't treat that connection differently. But imagine you did things over that connection you wouldn't be willing to do otherwise. Then that would be a very bad situation. So that's probably a piece of the visibility authentication is an important question whether we care about that or not.
Thank you, Ecker. Are there any other comments? I think people are starting to wind down, Glenn.
I think we're all getting a little bit burnt out. This has been a very intense conversation the last 2 hours. Okay, so then I move that we move on ahead to the closing comments by the chair.
Paul Hoffman. Yep.
I think Paul just posted what I was about to say. Sign the attendees list. We have about 40 some plus people. And we have about 36 right now that have signed the attendees list in the Etherpad. So I only have a couple things to say. We're not necessarily planning on having another interim before IETF in November. We can discuss that and see how things go. But there is the sweet spot for when we would have it, which would be near the end of October, is coincident with an ICANN meeting. And given the significant overlap between the two groups, I think that asking people to try to do an interim for this and participate in ICANN discussions might be a little too much thing. So I suspect we'll just not have an interim between now and the next IETF meeting, but we'll have lots of discussion on the list. That's my bit. Dave?
Well, I'll just say that one of the things that we're also considering and will be worthy of discussion is just what the structure of our next meeting at the IETF should look like. Traditionally many IETF meetings have been kind of presentation heavy with a little bit of discussion. But we have also seen groups like QUIP and HEDPPIS run pretty effectively by running a working group meeting, much like an interim actual working group meeting. And so we'll be interested in hearing feedback about, how we'll be able to get the most done. And I see that Andrew would like to say something.
It was merely in response to that comment, Dave. I know you've currently requested, I think, 1 2-hour slot for IETF 109. And I was just going to sort of suggest, is it worth considering requesting 2 and doing 1 for presentations and 1 purely for discussion? Just a thought.
That is absolutely worthy of consideration also. So we will welcome all feedback on how you think, especially as we seem to be coming to some conclusions about things that we can work on. How will we be able to work on these things most effectively? And once again, the Cody link is for the attendee list has been linked a couple of times now in the WebEx chat. And I think we are pretty well done here. I mean, Glenn?
I think we are done. So I'd like to thank Andrew for the excellent job we're watching, and Ben and Chris Box.
Well, and absolutely, once again, heroic note takers. I am more than impressed with how well you were able to capture a very lengthy discussion. So thank you so much to our note takers for the job that you've done.
I'm starting to think our note takers may have at one point been a court transcriber, because these notes are really, really well done.
Yeah, it's been mostly.
Okay, you're all free for breakfast or sleep or whatever you're off to next. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.